My name is Amy Chartier. I'm the section chief for the IRIS program. I have been in that role for a very brief amount of time, probably about 6 months. But prior to that, I did work in IRIS in another role, and I also worked in best practice specifically related to employment issues. So this is a topic that's very important to myself and to Chris as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give Chris the opportunity to introduce himself and give you a bit of his history, and we'll get going.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I got them wired up here. So yeah, my name's Chris Sell. I've worked with the department actually for about 12 years. I started working for the department on Medicaid infrastructure grant, which included a lot of research initiatives specifically geared toward return to work efforts, employment-related projects. So that experience was really great for me starting out with the department. I was actually a contractor with UW Stout and the Vocational Rehabilitation Institute. And I worked on a lot of projects like the SSI or SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance 1-for-2 employment pilot, which led to a lot of really good research that we use today and leadership at the department uses today to make evidence-based decisions on employment policies. I have been with the IRIS program for about 6 years. I currently work as the IRIS system administrator for the WISIT system, case management system. I have been also served as the lead data analyst for the program for quite some time, and also been the lead on employment initiatives within IRIS up until the last couple of years. So that's a little bit about my experience. I was happy that Amy asked me to present. Employment's always been something that's been really interesting to me and something that I think the department could be better at and more successful and set people up to have better employment outcomes. So I just kind of wanted to start out. Do we have an idea? Are there any IRIS participants in the crowd? Got a couple? All right, excellent. What about IRIS consultants? Do we have any consultants? Cool. And anyone from DVR, DPI, any of our sister agencies? Cool. Awesome. Excellent. Well, and is there anyone in like family care, managed care? Okay. Cool. Just getting an idea of our audience so we can hopefully really have you get a lot out of this presentation. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end. We appreciate it if you'd hold your questions for now. And like I said, we should have a good amount of time to answer any questions that come up along the way. So yeah, today we're going to talk about employment and self-direction. Before we start, I wanted to just kind of briefly discuss why employment is really important for DHS. Employment's really unique, and I think that's one of the reasons I find it very interesting. The reason it's so unique is it really crosses across 3 different state departments. There's Division of Public, DPI basically oversees the schools and obviously education, and that does lead to career building. Education is meant to develop those skills, so that's really interesting and unique, and it also has a huge impact on lives of those youth and youth in transition. It also crosses Department of Workforce Development, DWD, which is where DVR, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, is, and within DVR, that's where a lot of employment services are provided. And then there's DHS, Department of Health Services. So if you think about DHS, why is employment so important for DHS? Well, what's really interesting is what research has shown over the years is that people who are working in the community have shown to have better health outcomes. They're healthier. It's very interesting that the research continues to show that trend. So as we look to make our mission of ensuring that all Wisconsin citizens are healthy and safe, it's really important that we push employment initiatives because that directly really leads to healthier outcomes for individuals. So It can be really frustrating, I know, for people to navigate 3 different departments when you're working through employment issues. I know it can be very frustrating when we talk about funding and which agency is going to fund certain employment services. I can tell you that it's frustrating on our end as well, but that is the bureaucracy that we live in, and we try to do our best to make it clear and give people the tools, resources, and information to make sure that they can succeed within employment. So that's really what is most interesting. The good news is all 3 departments really have a vested interest in making employment a mission and really setting up people to succeed. So we'll continue to do our due diligence and working with our sister agencies within the state of Wisconsin. And I do empathize with some of the challenges and frustrations that come with that. And I hope that we'll continue to implement initiatives that really improve that coordination and collaboration amongst the 3 agencies involved. So I kind of wanted to just lead with that because I know it can be a frustration. And DHS is considered the funder of last resort. I know some people have heard that, and that can be confusing. But since we are health services, agencies like DWD and DVR, that really is their critical mission, is to build up the workforce and the economy. So that's why a lot of times we're always saying, hey, did you talk to DVR? Did you seek out that? Because that's just a rule and a regulation that we have to follow. So that's really what I wanted to lead with before we get back in. And we do want to talk about how this relates to IRIS and the principles of self-direction. IRIS is a self-directed long-term care program. It's utilized by over 18,000 people in the state of Wisconsin. So we want to build up that self-direction and explain kind of how you could use IRIS to really support your employment goals. So in my eyes, employment is self-direction. It's really important to talk about person-centered career planning and us to talk about how DHS can really support people in their employment goals. So that's kind of what I wanted to lead with. I'll toss it over to Amy. She can explain a little bit more.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. So I want to talk just briefly. Employment is more than a job. Employment provides additional money to do things people enjoy. It's a reason to get up and get going every day. It's a sense of value and purpose, and it's an opportunity to expand those relationships in your life. So with that, we want to talk a bit about person-centered career planning. You hear a lot about our person-centered planning process. I believe that person-centered career planning would be the next step to that. Do you want to hit the slide?
Yeah.
So this is intended to help people identify and achieve the goals that they're looking for, to identify their interests, preferences, desires, and what it's going to take to move through that process. This process is intended to assist, not prescribe. So it's to help people figure out where they want to go and how they want to get there. So we're going to talk a little bit about a few types of employment. We want to talk specifically about community employment. So we're talking about integrated employment. So there's competitive integrated employment, and that's that employment where you get paid a wage similar to the person sitting next to you doing the same job, regardless of whether or not they have a disability. And then we have integrated employment. This typically is where we have more of the supported group employment or group supported employment. And this is an environment where you don't necessarily work with people who don't have disabilities, but you are working in the community. And for a lot of folks, this is a step towards competitive integrated employment. It's that introduction to a job in the community. And then employment itself is finding a job that interests you and help you meet the purposes that you identify. So many of you have been introduced to our guiding principles. These are principles for employment that were developed by DHS a few years ago. they really continue to be of value and importance. This is something that the department, I think, over the years has moved as a priority closer and closer to the top. So if you talk with Curtis Cunningham, you'll hear that employment is one of his most important priorities that he's been participating in. So the guiding principles were intended to, they were intended to emphasize the importance that everyone can work and that your job should be based on your interests and your skills, not on what's vacant, but what are you interested in doing and what would you like to do. Competitive and integrated employment is the preferred outcome for DHS, acknowledging that that's not always the first step for everyone. And then it talks about working creates a stronger path towards physical and mental health. Chris talked about that a little bit in the beginning. Next page. Work is also a pathway out of poverty. It's allowing people to have that extra money to do some things that they enjoy besides having that small amount of money from your benefits that barely covers the simple things that are just a basic need in your life. It's also something that helps reduce the reliance on public benefits, and it's cost effective. Students with disabilities who participate in general classes are required to obtain competitive integrated employment and earn higher wages and need fewer supports. So with this point, I want to talk a little bit about WIOA. That is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is an act that requires now schools to introduce students to jobs while they're in school, to introduce them to the opportunity for further education, and to ensure that informed choice is happening, that someone has the opportunity to see what working in the community would look like and what types of jobs would interest them. The benefits to the Workforce Innovation Act is services have improved for over 20 million Americans. It makes employment or gaining employment less complicated, and it provides an education and benefits the communities and our businesses. Next slide. So we talk about when parents, teachers, and other adults in their life expect that a child or teenager will work, they're up to 5 times more likely. One of the things that's really important is increasing the expectations that parents have that anyone can work. Anyone can continue their education, and you shouldn't just settle for what might be offered. Having 2 or more paid community experiences during high school means that somebody is 5 times more likely to work in the community after school. And making informed choices about employment, people with disabilities need opportunities to receive that comprehensive information. That includes work incentive benefits, reasonable accommodations, supports, and opportunities to try a variety of community jobs. And then Chris talked about this briefly as well, interagency coordination at the state level with long-term care agencies, the Department of Workforce Development, public instruction, businesses, technical college, and school districts, as well as local and regional coordination, is necessary to help people achieve these goals. So it is a grassroots effort. And the last of the guiding principles is society as a whole and businesses in all sectors of the economy can benefit from a workforce that includes and actively engages people with disabilities. And there are businesses that have truly embraced this. If any of you have ever had a chance to watch the previous CEO from Walgreens present on the initiatives that they've taken, the approach that they have taken to employing people with disabilities, it's absolutely outstanding. There's a TED Talk on that if you haven't seen it, and I would highly recommend it. So really briefly, Chris talked about interagency coordination. So These are the agencies that he talked about, and with yourself in the middle and your successful employment. And what I want to just talk about briefly is there are resources that have been developed in coordination by all of these groups for young people who are transitioning into the adult programs and transitioning into employment. There's something called the Transition Action Guide, and it talks about what your responsibilities are as the person receiving or looking for employment. It talks about the responsibilities of a parent or a caregiver, of DVR, of IRIS consultants, or the interdisciplinary staff if you're with family care. If you are in the adult system, that is called the Technical Assistance Guide. Strange, they're both called the TAG, but one is a Transition Action Guide, the other is a Technical Assistance Guide. They are very helpful, so if you have an opportunity, please look those up online. You can Google them, and you'll have no challenge finding them. In addition to that, we have some agreements across these departments to ensure that this is a priority. So we have something called the Memorandum of Understanding, and that is an agreement between DHS and DVR. And it talks about who is responsible for what and when. In addition to that, we have an agreement called an interagency agreement, and that agreement is between all three departments. So the Department of Health Services, the Department of Workforce Development, and the Department of Public Instruction. These are valuable agreements. They benefit everyone, although they don't specifically speak to anyone in this room. What they speak to is the responsibilities of these entities to ensure that we are supplying people with the opportunity and the tools and resources to become employed in the community if that's what your interest and desire is.
All right. So where do you start? This is a fantastic question. Let me start real quick. Let's see. So I want to start off, and I just want to say I'm not one to sugarcoat things. I like to cut to the chase, kind of, hopefully make things simple and clear as much as possible, which is a challenge when you work for the state and you work in government, but I'll do my best. So I think the one thing I definitely want to point out, and I think it sometimes gets, under-realized, but it is not easy to start the process. Starting can be the most difficult part. And it's not easy to find a job. The majority of job interviews and applications, honestly, end in rejection. When a candidate is applying and you're up against 5, 10, 15 other candidates for one position, those odds aren't great. So the thing to remember is that this is not to discourage anyone from seeking employment. It's just to know that this is a natural part of finding a job. It's difficult. It takes resilience, and you have to keep trying. And it happens to everybody. So it's really important to keep trying, stay positive, and really sell yourself in those job interviews. And one thing I always kind of tell myself, because I've had many of rejections over the years as I've tried to have different positions, is that if that employer doesn't see the value in you, maybe they're not willing to look past some of the things that make you unique, do you really want to work for that employer? I mean, I think it's fair to question that and think about that. I'm a firm believer that certain things happen for a reason, and if you're resilient and take pride on being resilient and keep trying, I'm confident eventually something will work out. And it really doesn't matter about the job fit. That's one thing that employers constantly talk about and think about, is does the employee really fit with the position? So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, to not always take rejection personally. It's something that, like I said, everyone has to deal with. And it can be really challenging. It can be frustrating, but stay the course. And, there are other options like starting your own business. If you see some of the booths that are set up there, some of individuals have gotten really creative with coming up with a micro enterprise or self-employment opportunities that they don't have to worry about working for someone else. They create their own schedule. They sell their own items or goods or services. So there's plenty of opportunities and there's plenty of resources within the state or outside the state who can really help people find different options. So I want to at least kind of personalize this a little bit and give you a quick little story within my life. But at one point, I was unemployed, looking for jobs. I probably had 10 different prospective jobs, interviewed for all of them, didn't get any of them. I was pretty beating myself up about it. I'm my own worst critic, so it was something that I took to heart, thought it was something that I was doing wrong. So I went into this 11th job interview, and I was really well prepared. I thought I gave a fantastic interview. The interview panel was, laughing and seemed to be really engaged. And 2 weeks went by and found out I didn't get the job. So I called them up and I said, hey, I'm just looking for some feedback on my approach to the interview and, why I thought the interview went really well. What was the reason? And they actually told me that they thought the interview was incredible. They thought I did a fantastic job, but they didn't think I was a good fit. And they honestly said this. They said that we didn't think you'd like the job. And I said, well, I really need a job right now, and who are you to tell me that I wouldn't like it? So I was totally taken back by that, and it really frustrated me. But as I thought back on it, and then finally, eventually ended up landing a job, I realized, they were probably right. It was a job that I applied for, and I don't think I really actually would have liked it. It involved, just doing data entry, and, I'm a pretty personable person, so, yeah, I probably wouldn't have stayed there very long if I found a different opportunity, but at the time, it just made no sense to me and was incredibly frustrating. So it's those types of things that you really don't know the reason people are making the decisions, especially from a prospective employer standpoint. But just keep in mind that if it didn't work out, just keep trying, be resilient, and that's really what's going to be the most important part of that. Now, as we talk about the theme of the conference with the superheroes, I was thinking of a quote that kind of ties a little bit of this together. And my dad always told me this, and it's kind of interesting, that what makes a good fighter isn't how many punches they throw, it's how many punches they can take. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm not encouraging violence or fighting, but I thought it was a very interesting way to think about things, in that it's that resilience and that keep getting up and keep trying that is the most important thing to take of that. So as I thought about superheroes and things like that, I think that's one thing that you see a lot of times within these superheroes, is this resilience and ability to keep coming up and standing up to those challenges that you face. So that's kind of the precursor into this next slide about where to start. Within IRIS, one of the first steps is to start to talk to your IRIS consultant. IRIS consultants are very knowledgeable about what IRIS services are available. They're supposed to be very knowledgeable about the community and the resources available. And they're a great starting point. So we really encourage you. We have some fantastic IRIS consultants to really take advantage of that resource. In addition, the program is also working on developing a career planning survey or assessment. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about this. It's something I actually had worked on a couple years ago as working in through employment, and as my role grew to work more on the WISIT system, we kind of put it on the back burner for a little bit. But I think we're now in a good spot to revisit this and get it going again. But the reason for this assessment or survey or whatever you really want to call it, it's really just a label, is that it's really not meant to collect data. I know that we do a lot of data collection and trying to figure out statistics, and that's not what this is meant to do. This is meant to have a goal to help participants in ICs really have a good conversation about their skills, their interests, as it relates to the community and a potential career. And it's also meant to really keep a running narrative going with that IRIS consultant, so that they can understand the situation, understand what the participant is most interested in, try to kind of make some connections within the community. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the average IRIS consultant has about 40 participants, and that's a lot. So don't always assume that your IC could remember every single situation or conversation, because when you work with 40 different people on a regular basis, sometimes it can get a little confusing. So the other point of this assessment is so that the participant doesn't have to keep retelling their story. And we've seen a lot of benefits of that with our case management system, in that that information gets saved so that an IRIS consultant can revisit it before having a welcome call or a weekly call, or not weekly, a monthly call, or a quarterly face-to-face visit. So we've seen a lot of benefits that, and want to use that resource to really log some good conversations between the participant and the consultant. So this will especially be beneficial if a participant decides to either switch IRIS consultants or switch IRIS consultant agencies. We have that information in the system, and it can be shared with that new consultant or new consultant agency, so that they can really hit the ground running and understand what's really of interest with that participant. So what are the types of questions and conversations that we want the participant and the consultant to discuss? So the first one is kind of assessing your talents. So what are your interests, skills, or unique abilities? What are activities do you enjoy doing? What are your hobbies and interests? What do you think are your strengths? Do you enjoy doing things in your community? And are you involved in either a community organization or center, church, advocacy organization, and even some simple things like, do you like being outside in nature or indoors? That may seem like a strange question, but my wife has very severe allergies, so she actually prefers to do things inside. So for her, working outside and raking leaves would not be a job that she would be interested in, obviously. So again, it's meant to just be a conversation. These are kind of prompts that we want to give the IC to start having that conversation. And a lot of the benefit isn't just for employment. It's really understanding the participant better, which hopefully will lead to really ensuring health and safety, making sure that the IRIS plan is set up effectively. So it really has more than just employment at heart. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. So that would be one area of it. The other area would be education. And obviously this is important because some jobs require certain education levels. But we do kind of want to know, did you complete high school or an equivalent? Did you have any other additional learning courses? What did you like or dislike about school? Sometimes that can be informative as far as, what types of classes people like, or what did they find particularly interesting, or what did they really dislike about school? I mean, I'm sure we all have those likes and dislikes. Did you have a favorite class? And what class did you dislike or find particularly challenging, or maybe on the vice versa, particularly interesting? Do you enjoy learning in a school environment? Some people do, some people don't. And are you interested in more schooling? There may be other opportunities out there that don't involve enrolling in college, where you could get some schooling. So it all depends on your community and what resources are available, but getting the IC and the participant to start having this conversation at least gets a little bit further down that paradigm. Work history. Again, we're not doing this to collect data. This is just for the IC to really understand if the participant has had any work experience, and what was the result of the work experience. Did you receive payment for your work? Work doesn't always have to be paid. All of those experiences are very, very beneficial to the individual's potential career. How did you find and get a job, or this particular job? What did you like or dislike? Did you get along with your coworkers? And that can always depend on the type of job. I've had jobs where I've not liked my coworkers. I've had jobs where I do like my coworkers. That is one of these jobs, so that's a good thing. And that can really go towards, overall how that employment outcome could really be successful. If you aren't working for this employer anymore, what is the reason you left? Or did it result in a termination? I mean, again, this is not meant to pass any judgment. It's just meant to have a solid conversation to really set the foundation for how to achieve employment outcomes and goals and a career. And was there anything that could have made it better? Thank you. Next one. All right, so volunteer experience. One thing that I found when I was going through my job search and not having a lot of luck was I still wanted to fill my time and have a meaningful day, and that's one thing that Amy will touch on in a little bit. But I found it valuable to get involved in some volunteer experiences, and as I'm a prospective employer, those are things that are valuable to an employer. You know, they went out of their way to try to do something even though it didn't involve working for pay. And maybe that isn't something that is really of interest to that person. So think about that, you know, and if you haven't volunteered, it's a great opportunity to get involved in your community. As you know, as I mentioned before, when you're competing with so many other individuals for one position, sometimes it pays to know some of the people. A lot of us get jobs based on community connections and people that we know, and volunteering in your community can be one way to really build up those community connections. And who knows, you know, maybe your neighbor who's also working with the neighborhood association that you're volunteering with has an opportunity. Maybe they're like, hey, I'm hiring someone to do such and such job, and I know from working with you just on a volunteer basis that you'd be a fantastic fit for this. So it's something that definitely keep in mind, and it's something that we definitely don't want to devalue. It's a very important experience. And what kind of organizations and causes interest you the most? I mean, that can be a good flag for an IC to say, oh, maybe there's some community connections that they could get involved with. Maybe they want to get involved with their local church or something of that nature. All very beneficial things to build up your experience. What opportunities are available in your area that match your interests? And that's always the things that help people succeed the most, are finding opportunities that really align with what they like to do, what they're interested in. And how much time do you want to spend volunteering? That's always a question that is good. You maybe don't want to get involved in a volunteer opportunity that's 80 hours a week. That might be a little much. But, you know, it's good to kind of think about that as well. So that's kind of a volunteer experience section. And then accommodation and assistive technology. I think this is something that can be extremely powerful. And I know from the IRIS program, we've seen some participants who've been extremely successful with just some of the technology improvements that have been coming to fruition recently. So we do kind of want to get at some of that. You know, maybe there's a way to use your IRIS funds to purchase some assistive technology that would make you more employable or make you feel more comfortable seeking employment. So what type of transportation do you use to get around your community? Are there certain days of the week or times of the day that make transportation easier? Would you need help with personal care on the job? That's a question and something that IRIS can absolutely support with our self-directed personal care service that we offer. And are you used to or comfortable with computers and the internet? Nowadays, so much of our world is digitized and reliant on computers and the internet. And that can be opportunities that, if someone has accessibility issues, maybe those types of things are things that are worth seeking. So if you're good at computers, you're savvy with the internet, there's always opportunities there within the current workforce for those types of skills. I can't understate that enough, that just the IT component of positions nowadays is very valuable. So that is kind of what we were thinking as far as, and I guess we have another section of career goals. And this is kind of getting at the larger, we've had this discussion, we've walked through experiences, interests, and now we kind of want to get at, if you could have any job, what would that job be? What would that job look like? Have you ever thought about starting a business? I know that can seem extremely intimidating, but there are resources to help people with that. And individuals have found extremely great outcomes from being able to start their own business because they're doing something they really enjoy. Obviously, for work to be work, typically it's implied that maybe you don't love your job, but if you love your job, it makes work all that more rewarding. What do you believe you can achieve if you set your mind to it? That's probably maybe seems a little rhetorical, but it's a question that is worth thinking about. You really need to think about, what do you want to do? What could you do with the right supports to really be successful and have a career that makes you happy? Because happiness is really what we're trying to achieve. Happy people integrated in the community, are healthier, lead more successful lives. So that's kind of why we ask those questions there at the end as well. And before I turn it over to Amy to talk about a meaningful day, I just want to mention that this is something that's still a work in progress. We're trying to get something in place so that there's a tool and resources for IRIS consultants and participants to really start having these discussions. Again, I can't highlight it enough. This is not about data. It's really just meant to be a better tool to really help push the people into experiences that may feel uncomfortable, but are really meant to have a more meaningful life and a more meaningful day, which I guess is probably a good time to pass it off to Amy.
So building a meaningful day, some people participate in a program called Building Full Lives. These are all intended to be the same type of thing. And the most important piece of this is it means something different to everyone. For some people, a meaningful day is, I want to work 40 hours a week. For other people, it might be that they want to work on a very part-time basis, but they want to be involved in their community. It could be through volunteer work. It could be just being an active community member. Some people want to work at their local garden as a volunteer, whatever that might look like. So it's just remembering that this is based on what it is that your interests are and what would be meaningful to you. And it's really about becoming connected with your community, building those relationships, and it's about having that true sense of longing. Everybody wants to be a member of their community. You want to be known and you want to be a part of your community. So in order to build that meaningful day, we need to talk about some of the services that are available. Today we're going to talk about just a few of the employment services. So in that meaningful day, that might include transportation services, that might include daily living skills. Those are things that we're not going to focus on so much today, but please understand that those are other services that are available. The first one we're going to talk about is individual supported employment services. These are the services for folks who are working individually in the community. You're not working with another group of people. You may have someone with you who's supporting you 100% of the time. You may have somebody who checks in twice a week, and they're just checking in to make sure everything's going okay and that you have what you need. But the purpose of this is intended to provide that support to help an individual maintain their job. Again, for the individual supports, this is considered competitive integrated employment. That's where that's going to fall in. And so it's going to be that minimum wage or higher. And what we really mean by that is making a wage that's similar to someone else with or without a disability doing exactly the same work that you're doing. The outcome of this service is sustained employment. We want people to be able to have a job and keep a job as long as they're interested in it. We understand that most of us did not start in the job or the career that we ultimately wanted to work in. There's steps along the way. Sometimes it means trying a few jobs, and if they're not what you want, you can try something else. So that support may include self-employment. Some people choose to be self-employed at home or within the community, and then it also includes that home-based self-employment. So the next is our group-supported employment services. And again, this is that community integrated employment. It's the non-competitive integrated employment. And these are services that include training activities for some people. They're provided in a regular business in the community, but there are a group of people that they're with. Sometimes you're with people in the same room at the same table. Sometimes you're in the same building, but you have the same staff that move across and support you. You don't have a regular supervisor at the job. Your staff serve in that role. So this is a nice starting point for folks, just to get that exposure to being employed in the community and building that comfort zone of working in some place that is outside of maybe their comfort zone. So again, this one is intended to be intended to happen in the community, and again, promoting that integrated employment. The outcome of this service remains the same. We want people to have sustained employment. We want you to have the opportunity to grow in your employment, and we want to help you get to that point where you can be as independent as possible, recognizing that independent looks different for everyone. So group-supported employment is that integrated employment rather than competitive integrated employment. Again, there are other employment services. You can flip, it's okay. There are other employment services available, but we wanted to focus today specifically on those services that happen in the community, given that that is the path that we're promoting. It does not, by any means, eliminate other allowable or approved services that people have requested. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about DVR. Oh, sorry, I guess I was going to talk about DVR. Sorry about that. So for a lot of people, the question is, have you worked with DVR before? And a number of people have, and they may have had an uncomfortable experience. It's their first time looking for employment in the community. It is a pretty in-depth assessment process, similar but goes pretty deep compared to what Chris talked about as those engaging conversations. And then they're helping you look for something in the community that might suit what you're looking for. That can be pretty scary for a lot of people. And so they may not have that initial positive outcome. And for some folks, they're willing to go back and keep trying until they're able to build that relationship and be able to identify what those real interests are and how to build that ladder of success to that job that they ultimately, or that career that they're ultimately working towards. But for other folks, they're very intimidated by the process and they don't want to go back. So one of the things that we strongly promote within IRIS is the involvement of the IRIS consultants in this, to walk that path with you whenever possible, to be able to assist and give you that sense of comfort throughout this process so that you can achieve that employment goal that you have, understanding that it is a long process for some people, and it can be a frightening process because you're retelling your story to people who don't know you. So I guess my question for you, just briefly, is have any of you gone through the DVR system? And did you feel like you had a positive outcome? Good. Sounds like it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I'm glad to hear that it is something that is positive for some folks here. In that process, it requires you to have an employment goal and a plan for your employment, and that plan is intended to be something that's kind of a living, breathing document. It's going to grow with you. You may think that you're interested in working in a garden, and you get out there and you know what, you really you pride yourself on your nails and the way things look, and this is not working for you. You have the right to say, hey, I appreciate this opportunity, but I think I'd like to look for something different. It's part of the process. So your plan is intended to be that living, breathing document that grows and changes along with you. But as long as you're with DVR, or as long as you're receiving employment services through IRIS or through family care, you are required to have an employment goal on your plan. So that's really important. If you don't have one, please take the opportunity at your next meeting with your consultant or your IDT staff to talk about the fact that you are interested in employment and you have no goal on your plan, because we do want to be consistent and we want to make sure that that's a priority for everyone. Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to go a little bit more in depth about what IRIS can do within the program regarding employment. So did you know that IRIS can pay for certain employment supports? Things like a job coach, personal care in the workplace, assistive technology, or pre-employment skills training. I definitely want to highlight this personal care in the workplace, because IRIS is unique in that we have a self-directed personal care option. Currently, I think there's about 7,000 IRIS participants who take advantage of this. And it allows you to get personal care in the community. And what that also means is you can get personal care at your job or in the workplace. So for individuals who have personal care needs, this service actually can be really beneficial. And I don't know that we've kind of, I guess, been as transparent about that as we probably could be, in that how beneficial that actually could be to obtaining or keeping a job. And I do want to point out that we do have been spending a lot of time on our IRIS website. There's definitely information about all of our employment policies, what services are available within the IRIS program. And the website's pretty easy, dhs.wi.gov/IRIS. So you can get to it pretty quickly. It could probably be streamlined a little bit, but I believe if you click on the resources tab, it'll take you to a policy manual and a work instructions manual and our IRIS service definition manual. And again, if you don't want to navigate that, then contact your IRIS consultant. They should be able to help out with understanding what IRIS can provide, either as far as services or supports. All right. So we also have a chapter 5.9 of the policy manual entitled Employment Planning, and it involves each one of these chapters. And I do just want to read a couple paragraphs. I'm not going to read every policy unless I don't want to put everyone to sleep. But I do want to put out there a couple pieces of information in our policy that I think is really important. And this paragraph actually comes directly from the federal government, and it's something that IRIS absolutely supports, which is why we put it directly at the beginning of our employment policy. Work is a fundamental part of adult life for people with and without disabilities. It provides a sense of purpose, shaping who we are and how we fit into our community. Meaningful work has also been associated with positive physical and mental health benefits, and is part of building a healthy lifestyle as a contributing member of society. Because it is so essential to people's economic self-sufficiency and well-being, people with disabilities and older adults with chronic conditions who want to work should be provided the opportunity and support to work competitively within the general workforce in pursuit of health, wealth, and happiness. All individuals, regardless of disability and age, can work. And work with opportunity, training, and support that build on each person's strengths and interests. The DHS in IRIS program supports the notion that all people can work for competitive wages in the community, and supports that all people, regardless of the severity of their disability, are entitled to integrated employment with the correct job match and appropriate supports. The positive effect of work on a person's health is well documented and evidenced by a lot of research. We actually have a couple links to a lot of this research that supports these concepts. directly in our policy. So if you look up the policy, you can actually find these reports that have these claims and the data to back them up. So if you are a person thirsty for knowledge, those opportunities are there within the IRIS website. And then lastly, research has shown that employment results in cost savings and less reliance on public benefits and more money going back into the local community. So I want to say that too, because like I said earlier, I'm not one to sugarcoat it. Government does come down to dollars at times, and obviously, it's something that I think some people aren't comfortable saying, but it is. Healthier people typically leads to a little bit more cost savings within state government. So numerous reasons, but that really kind of highlights the mission of employment, not even throughout the state, but also within IRIS. Now, as far as our actual employment policies, we do have policies on employment assessment. Again, this is the policy that's really driving our ability to and want to have an employment assessment, and that was really what I was getting at earlier when discussing those questions. Again, this is not meant for collecting data. This is meant to really help people obtain employment and really reach those career goals. We do have a section about working with DVR. One of the important parts of that is we really do encourage IRIS consultants to attend meetings with DVR. It really is self-direction, so it's really up to the participant, but we do recommend that participants request that their IRIS consultants attend those meetings with DVR. I think it's really important, as we've talked about, interagency collaboration and how the bureaucracy can be hard to navigate. So having a face-to-face with someone on the IRIS side and someone on the DVR side and the participant all at the table, in our eyes, is what really is setting up those types of collaboration to be most successful. Benefits counseling, and primarily work incentive benefits counseling, is something we're going to go into a lot more depth in a couple slides here. It is a very important service, in my opinion. And then we have pre-employment and employment training services. One of those would be Project Search. Project Search, as many people know, was a governor's initiative, and we've seen incredible results, really, from that program, which is why it is separated out as a separate policy. And employment data, so here's your data policy. We collect data outside of the assessment. It's something that we require of the ICAs, and have been working with DWD, Department of Workforce Development, to try to obtain unemployment insurance data, which allow us to get data that the leadership and evidence-based decision makers can use, or at least kind of see how are we doing on employment. So again, we hope that most of that is kind of more behind the scenes and not really intrusive to a participant. And then self-directed employment services. This one's really interesting because there's recently a bill that was passed that would basically give the state funding to implement, and for those of you who are familiar with Dane County, this Partners in Business model. I think it would be incredibly important for IRIS to utilize that Partners in Business model to help lead to better employment outcomes for participants. And really how it fits with IRIS is it will allow people to either hire participant hired workers or utilize people that are already working within that job site to just become a job coach, or to just help everyone within that employment opportunity, the staff, really pitch in and provide some of that support that maybe a job coach would. So employers have found this to be incredibly effective. I think it's a really cool opportunity. It may even allow the ability to reimburse an employer for the amount of cost that we would typically pay for an outside job coach to come in. So I think this is really cool. It's something that we haven't completely gotten off the ground yet, but it's in the works. And hopefully, I think BPDD is spearheading that initiative as well. So with their involvement, I have no doubt that this will probably be a successful initiative. All right, so we're going to move on to Project Search. Project Search is a business-led collaboration that enables young adults with disabilities to gain and maintain employment through training and career exploration. It's a 9 to 12 month program, provides total immersion in a large community business. I believe there's over 20 Project Search sites now. When I first started working on Project Search, I think we only had about 4 or 5. So the growth of this has been fantastic, and it's something that IRIS is absolutely supportive of. One thing to note, if you are an individual who wants to take advantage of Project Search, the IRIS program offers the ability to request a confirmation of funding letter. This would basically be something that you can include in a Project Search application packet that would say, if this participant is accepted into the program, the IRIS program will fund the Project Search program fee. So it's something that sites were very interested in. It gives them some reassurance that IRIS funds could be utilized if they're accepted into the program. Since we've allowed that, we've seen a lot of participants take us up on that. I don't know that we've really ever denied creating one of those. So it's been really successful since we've implemented that letter. We've seen a significant increase in the amount of IRIS participants that have been accepted into Project Search. There are a very limited amount of spots, but the results for those who are able to get into the program are extremely, extremely successful. I think last I checked, and this may be a year or two outdated, but I think 86% of the individuals who went through Project Search ended up in a full-time community integrated position. So we absolutely support Project Search, and this was a note directly from the governor during the last State of the State address, which was really cool if the governor is going to call out a specific program during the State of the State address. And he specifically called out Project Search by saying, the success rate for Project Search in Wisconsin is 88%. I guess I was a little off, which makes it one of the best in the country. 8 years ago, there was just one program site in the state. When school starts in the fall, there will be 27. So it goes to show that employment is important all the way up the chain to even the governor level, especially with individuals who utilize long-term care. So I thought that was really cool and something to point out about how Project Search really is one of those really cool pre-employment training programs to try to utilize. So we're going to take a moment here. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention real quick before we take a look at our video. I know that for those of you who are involved in the IRIS program, and there's a concept of a budget amendment, just know that employment and having employment goals, if you need services, any of these services that we've discussed, we rarely, very rarely would deny a budget amendment if it is tied to employment. So that's something to keep in mind as you talk to your IRIS consultant, or I don't think we've ever denied a budget amendment for someone who's been accepted into Project Search, for example. But I would recommend, if you can tie a budget amendment request to an employment goal or an employment opportunity, that creates a very strong likelihood that that budget amendment would likely get approved. So just keep that in mind. We do want to make sure that people are aware that the IRIS program really does support employment initiatives and will fund those appropriately as needed.
She truly does make us better at everything we do.
Morning, Melissa.
Morning. Good morning, Patty. Good morning, Jim. My name is Melissa Ramacher. I'm 25 years old. I mostly do the stuff here, clean the relaxation room, fill the coffee.
When she was developing inside me and the brain was developing, some of the cells in her brain kind of wandered into the center where the fluid is, and then they attach themselves to other areas that they don't normally belong. She has to work a little harder for some things that we kind of take for granted. My husband and I, after she was diagnosed, we just knew that she would be with us the rest of our lives. We just had built that into our future. We felt that we would have to take care of her and she would always be at home, and, you know, we would grow old together. This job's a lifesaver. It is everything that I need help with to help her. Transportation is the biggest struggle, right? So we're in Sauk City, she works in the Dells, in Wisconsin Dells, and then Iris helps fund that transportation.
I think that each one of us has learned from her. We have grown. We have become more caring. We have become more aware. She has brought a sense of unity.
I love my coworkers. I love my boss. I just love everybody here.
The transformation has been amazing. Confidence level, appearance, everything. My husband and I we're to the point where, yeah, I don't think she's going to be with us forever. I think she will be out there on her own. I get all emotional about it because it's, her success is my every happiness. Every bit.
All right. Most of the story is obviously one that's very powerful and really shows how
But my understanding is that JNB
Iris can support individuals and set up people to be very successful. But I don't want to take away from Melissa. I mean, really incredible individual who's really found ways to succeed regardless of Iris. We're just a small part in hoping to make her employment outcome more successful. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of things that are really important, I think, to understand how the employment initiative has grown over the years. As I tend to kind of go back to research, because that is my background. One of the things that we've consistently seen, and research continues to document, is the number one reason people don't go back to work is that they're fearful of losing access to their benefits or their health care. And I'm not going to lie, I mean, that's a huge, huge barrier. And I will not lie either in saying that our programs sometimes don't do enough to try to address that barrier. What we have found, though, is one thing that can help is work incentive benefits counseling. It is a service that, again, as I was mentioning earlier, if you were to request a budget amendment for work incentive benefits counseling and you have an employment goal, that's almost a no-brainer for us to approve. It is a very valuable service, and from my personal experience working for the state for 12 years, when I started working in Medicaid, honestly, and this was my day-to-day job for 40 hours a week, it took me probably 2 to 3 years before I really understood Medicaid, understood long-term care. It is a lot of bureaucracy to navigate and understand. And it's just complicated. I wish it wasn't as complicated, but unfortunately it is. So one of the areas that this can really help address is we have these individuals who their entire job is to understand how working can impact an individual's benefits. And they are work incentive benefits counseling work incentive benefits specialists. So we really push this. I wish this service was actually utilized more often, but I don't think we also do a good job of really communicating the importance of it and how IRIS can pay for it. So work incentive benefits counseling refers to services and supports aimed at 1, promoting and sustaining successful employment outcomes, and 2, doing so in ways that allow those receiving the services and supports to make informed choices about their level of work activity. So although we may not be able to solve all the bureaucratic policies and how things interact, everyone's got a unique situation as far as what benefits they potentially qualify for. Work incentive benefits counseling can at least give you some reassurance that the decisions you're making are really going to be in your best interest. Also, the impact of work incentive benefits counseling on employment outcomes. This is evidence from 2 return to work demonstrations. This is part of some of the work that I started on when I worked initially with the department. But we found that the amount of benefits counseling provided has a positive and statistically significant impact on employment outcomes. So I want to quickly show a couple slides just to kind of show some visuals of how benefits counseling really directly relates to individuals being more likely to be employed and having higher earnings. What's that? Oh, I guess those slides actually got removed. I apologize for that. I had to take them from a PDF document, and the department had some editing requests that we weren't able to make. So I will, let's see, I'll try to get a link out. If anyone wants to see that research, if you want to drop your email off to me at the front after the presentation, I'll be glad to email you a copy of those papers. They're actually pretty short and digestible. It was fairly simple research. We just looked at individuals who received benefits counseling to individuals who didn't and tracked their employment situations over 8 quarters. And it led to a positive correlation, in those that had received benefits counseling every quarter were the highest earners, and those that received, maybe just a few benefits counseling sessions had successful outcomes, not quite as far, and then those who received no benefits counseling, the line stayed pretty flat. So it just reiterates that the benefits counseling can be really important, even if it is just to give you some peace of mind and some reassurance from a professional that is well-versed in all the different regulations and policies and rules that could potentially impact an individual's benefits and employment. So one of the other things that can address this barrier of fear of losing benefits is actually through policy. And one of the things that I'm really happy about is that we were able to finally, since 2000, this program called the Medicaid Purchase Plan, or MAP, had not been reformed or redesigned, and it wasn't really the true work incentive program that it needed to be. This program is specifically designed to be a work incentive program, meaning that if you earn more than the current threshold for eligibility, you can enroll in this MAP program, pay a premium, and actually keep all your benefits while you're working. So this is really to eliminate that, what we call a cash cliff, where you make a certain amount of money, all of a sudden you're ineligible. This is supposed to support you up through that and continue to work at a level where your earnings would exceed the eligibility threshold. So MAP offers eligible people with disabilities who are working or interested in working the opportunity to buy health care coverage through the Wisconsin Medicaid program. Depending on an individual's income, a premium payment may be required for this health care coverage. And again, the goal is to incentivize, encourage, and support people working in the community. So again, it's well documented that this fear of losing benefits is a huge barrier, and I think that this is one area where we actually were able to reform some policy to hopefully better support that. These changes just came out in the last governor's budget. The department is still working to understand how all the changes impact the state. working with ADRCs to update them on some of the eligibility changes. So it's very much in the works. I'm sure that there will be more information coming out from the department as soon as a plan has been established about really how to implement these changes. So stay tuned on that. Hopefully there'll be some communications coming out very soon. And then as a very small piece of the MAP program is this health and employment counseling program. MAP will now allow a bunch of work training programs to be considered valuable or a verified source of trying to achieve employment. So it will allow you, even though you're not technically employed, it will allow you the ability to qualify for a program like MAP. So the HEC program is a 9-month pre-employment program for people with disabilities who are not employed but want to enroll in MAP. So that is the HEC program. We're also looking at a bunch of other pre-employment training programs that offer the same benefit and would allow someone to be eligible for the MAP program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Okay, well, we are rapidly running out of time, so I'm just going to buzz through these pretty quickly. We did include the where are we going for Bureau of Children's Services, because a lot of the feedback that we've received is that young people who are graduating from school and moving into the adult program find that it's very difficult to navigate from one system to the next. So that's something that we're working with Children's Services on, is how to make that transition a much more smooth process and get involved maybe a little sooner than we may have in the past. So their priorities currently are to prepare young people and their families for competitive integrated employment. So again, it's that raising those expectations. When they are in birth to 3, they're starting to have these conversations with families about, talk to your son or daughter. What is it that interests them? What would they like to do? Encourage people, these young people, to continue their education or to get that work experience to develop the career that they're interested in. So in addition to that, they're working on providing additional training to case managers so that they can have those difficult conversations with parents.
Whoops. Why am I going the wrong way?
And then with the adult long-term care, they're working on developing a statewide plan to address employment priorities. And this is something that they've been working on for quite a while, but it's really been ramped up because on March 21st, our governor signed into law our Employment First bill. So what that does is it requires that DVR and DPI and DHS partner together, that they identify a common goal, meaning an increased percentage of the number of people who become gainfully employed in the community, and the steps that it's going to take to get there. In addition to that, they will be required to have reporting for all departments on the same website so that it is apples to apples. So this is something that they're working on now, and it sounds like it shouldn't be that challenging. But when you look at the definition of disability within DPI, within DVR, and within DHS, they're all significantly different. So ensuring that they're reporting on the same group of people is really the piece that I think they're going to have to do a lot of legwork on. But that is something they're in process of working on, and those are the priorities there. So at this point, there are 2 slides after this that have additional resources. You currently do not have this presentation in front of you, but it will be provided through the website for the conference following, so that will be available to you. And we wanted to just give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have any. Sure.
How long is there a time limit for the MAP program for them to be eligible for it?
No, there shouldn't be any kind of time limit of any kind. The work training programs, some of those have a time limit just because we want to see a progression of, they're in a training program, not getting paid, and eventually working towards having a paid position. Those aren't all completely defined. I mean, I know the HEC program has some, but there's a lot of area for us to make some subjective decisions on, you know, if someone should still be able to remain in the program or not. So I think if you're really doing your due diligence on seeking employment or you taking advantage of some of these work training programs, I think it's likely that that time limit wouldn't apply. But I will say that some of that is still being fleshed out at this point. Sure. That I'm not actually sure on. I wish I knew a little bit more about that. My role has shifted a little bit outside of employment, so I won't say I'm the most versed on what's really been happening as of lately. I know some of my work dating back was on SSDI specifically and really addressing that cash cliff that led to that benefit offset national demonstration project. But honestly, anything that I would speculate on would probably be misinformation. But I'd be happy to take that question back to the department and see if I can get some better guidance.
I would actually recommend if you go onto the DHS website, there is a employment mailbox. And so you could send your question directly to them and they can funnel that out to the appropriate people. Anybody else?
Question?
I just have to give a shout out to the Project Search program. I have a graduate.
Nice.
Congratulations.
She did her Project Search through the Stevens Point School District at Century Insurance, where they had 14 different job skills that they could work at in Century. The program director, Mary Lebow, was fantastic. She had 7 students at graduation. They each stood up and gave a speech in front of more than 100 people. 5 of them already were employed,
Wow.
and 2 had prospects, and since then I hear that the 2 have been employed, 1 including a gal that is legally blind,
Wow.
but she can do data entry with a large screen. And last I heard is that Century was actually bringing her back to employ her.
That's fantastic.
Fantastic program, run under the direct control.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
The first rotation was in the food service court. She started in the dish room, and within 2 weeks, the manager promoted her to kitchen helper,
Amazing.
which was the first. And then in her second rotation, because she was really interested in baking, they arranged for her to have an outside job with Big Apple Bagel.
Nice.
And at the end of her second rotation, she was hired,
Wow.
and she still works there, up to 30 hours a week.
That's fantastic.
It's great.
And it just goes to show, I mean, everyone has this unique skills and opportunities, and or not necessarily opportunities, but unique skills and interests. And if we can continue to build on programs like this that have been completely successful, you know, I think that everyone should be optimistic about finding employment and a career and something that really interests you. So congratulations on that. That's a huge achievement for anyone, really. So kudos.
It's a wonderful transition from the school environment into the working environment,
Absolutely.
especially if it's a teacher that they are already familiar with.
Sure.
Gives them a lot of security, but the build-up in their confidence was,
Oh, yeah.
when I went to graduation, I was just blown away
Yep.
by the confidence of each and every one of them to get up and speak.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. If anyone ever has the opportunity, or I would even encourage you to seek out the opportunity to go to a Project Search graduation, you may need to bring a handkerchief. It's incredible, and it's very empowering, and it'll motivate everybody, honestly. So those are typically open and available to people, and I would strongly recommend, if you hear of one in your community, to check it out. It's super cool.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Any other questions?
Well, just one last thought. I know that, I know that the state and our programs could do better. I wish we had more examples of programs like Project Search, but just know this is a big cultural change. It wasn't that long ago that the formal state definition of employment was the inability to, or employment of disability was the inability to work. So we've come a long way from that. That's not the definition of disability. It shouldn't be the definition of disability, but it just highlights how far we have come, but how far we also need to go. So I know that we have a lot of very committed, intelligent, hardworking people at the Department of Health Services that really share in this goal, and we're continuing to look for opportunities to push the mission forward as much as possible. So I really appreciate everyone's interest in being involved.
Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.